Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome back to Ahlulbayt Live. This is the final and the last segment of the show tonight. The topic is developing the parent-child relationship with our guest, Sister Marzia Hassan from Toronto, Canada. Just before the break, I read out a question from one of our viewers who just texted this particular one, and he's asking, or she's asking rather, apologies for that. She's asking, my mother-in-law interferes quite heavily with the way in which I bring up my child, both my daughter and my son. What do I do?
Okay, so again, I think the first thing is to recognize that grandparents have a very special role in the child's relationship, in the child's life. So to recognize the positive that the grandmother is bringing, which can be challenging if they have a different style of parenting than your own. So to remind oneself that, you know, although they may differ, for example, a common thing is for grandparents to be more lenient in giving gifts or in discipline than the parents. That's a really common thing that young parents struggle with. And again, to recognize that in the long run, what matters much more is the kind of relationship that they will have with the grandparent rather than, you know, the odd sweet or ice cream that the grandparent gave them. Having said that, there are some issues which can actually cause more conflict in terms of if sometimes the grandparent is undermining the parent's role by going against their wishes, you know, very obviously. And in that situation, again, it's a good idea to actually have a conversation with with the mother-in-law to explain that they really appreciate the good that she does for the children, and they recognize that it's coming out of love, and that she wants to have a special bond with the child. So again, when you start by acknowledging and appreciate what positive the person is bringing to the relationship, they are more likely to be able to be open to your point of view and to share, the challenges that you're facing as a parent.
Right, but at times it can also create lots of conflicts as well. I mean, in a sense that, let's say, if the grandmother, again, you mentioned that the grandmother wants to, has lots of affection and love for the towards the grandchild, and let's say if the grandmother, out of love, wants to wake up every day in the morning at 7 a.m. while the child goes to school, and the grandmother wants to make tea for that grandchild, okay, up until the age of 15. Now, the mother, on the other hand, said, hey, listen, 15, the child should learn how to make his own or her own cup of tea. So the mother is saying, listen, don't wake up in the morning at 7 a.m., all right? Stay in your bed. I know you love the child, but leave this to me now, all right? Let me mother the child, if that makes sense. Let me teach the child how to do certain things. To what age will the child be spoiled in? Will the child be spoiled? Every single day you wake up in the morning, make him tea, make him breakfast. I know you love him, so that can create conflict within the family. And also, as you mentioned earlier, that the child sees quite a lot going on at home. So according to the child might feel that, hey, my mother doesn't love me anymore because she doesn't wake up in the morning as my grandmother does. And so there's lots of different perceptions, different feelings going around. So how does one resolve this?
Right. So in terms of it creating conflict in your life, let's start with that. It can only create conflict if you let it.
Who lets it? The mother?
If the mother lets it, right?
Okay.
So if, for example, in my experience, what grandparents do to the child doesn't have that much potential of spoiling the child, really. Because I think if the general trend in the house is that the child takes responsibility for their own things, if the mother trains them that they are capable of making the tea or the breakfast, and they are actually being taught life skills, both the men and the women, both the boys and the girls, that this is, how you look after yourself. And if the grandparent wants to show them their love by feeding them or doing something for them, it's not usually a cause of much spoiling. In terms of the relationship between, in this case, the mother and the mother-in-law, it can certainly create conflict. And that's, again, people often come to counseling, for example, and ask how they can solve a particular issue. And reality is that if you are sitting with me, you can only control your own behavior.
Right.
So I can only talk to you about how you can manage the situation. There is nothing I can do about the grandparent. And, in the best case scenario, the more good relationships the child has with many people, the better off the child is going to be. So once we recognize that, it's much easier to be flexible around things that don't really matter that much.
Okay, no. Should the mother talk to the grandmother and say, you're interfering with my way of bringing up my child? Can you please stop that? Should they have a conversation?
So I would definitely not use those words. I would definitely not tell the mother-in-law that you're interfering. The way I would, if it comes to a point where it is actually creating significant, and it's not only my perception, but it's actually creating real issues for the child discipline, right? Again, a good time to talk to the mother-in-law is when you're not already in conflict. So for example, if she is in the middle, to use your example, if she's in the middle of making breakfast for the child, that's not the good time to approach it. A good time to approach it is when the child is not there, and you begin by acknowledging what the mother-in-law is doing right, and by appreciating that what she is doing is to forge a relationship and a bond with her grandchild. And after that, to share your concerns about how it's undermining what you are trying to do. That has a much greater likelihood of success than to tell the mother-in-law that you're interfering and please stop.
So speak to the mother-in-law at a time when it's all hunky-dory, and use nice and calmer words to explain the whole situation. Now, should the conversation involve the father as well, do you reckon?
In the example of the text, if the issue is actually between the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law, there is no reason to involve the husband in this case. If it's always best to deal with the issue with the person you have, rather than involving more members of the family than you need to.
Okay. Again, let me just, I just got a vibration on the phone, so let me just read out the question from the viewer. If I can just a kind note as well to our viewers that you can partake in the show 0234 11784 to lots of questions via the text number, but of course to speak to Sister Marzia, the phone lines are open for your calls 0234 11784. Okay, right. Again, this is kind of similar to what we've already. I think we've answered this already about the disciplining between the different approach between the husband and the wife. So maybe Sister Marzia, I think the viewer just tuned in. So maybe for the benefit of this particular viewer, if you can just summarize the different approach and how they can resolve this. So according to the viewer, he gives an example that. The wife wants to give something to the son, but the father is saying no, don't give it to the son, and there's a conflict between the two. And the son is being seen. The son sees this, and the son realizes that maybe the father doesn't love me anymore because my mother wants to give me something and my dad says no. So again, how do we resolve between the husband and the wife?
So one thing that we haven't spoken about actually is that if this is a consistent problem and you are dealing with it and you've actually tried to talk about it in terms of when there is calm, when you're both calm and when there is no conflict going on, and it continues to be an issue when you're very polarized in your views on parenting, it actually might be a good idea to get educated about what the best practices are. So in that situation, the ideal would be if you could take a class together, which would actually give you a lot of ideas and give you some information on, what is the best for the child. Is it best for the child to give them, whatever it is in that situation, or should you have some limits around that? Or if the workshop or a seminar is not possible, then to read a book together and actually, because again, in a situation like that, where both people are, really believe that their way is the right way, and of course that comes from our own parenting, that comes from how we were raised. Often by reading a book together, it gives you a third perspective, which may actually help to for both people to come to middle ground and to compromise on the issue.
Sure. Okay, the next question. My husband and I are going through some conflict. How do I convince him to come and speak to a counselor?
So often the best way is, if your husband is not willing right now, start counseling yourself.
Okay.
So again, like I said, I very often work with one spouse because the other spouse is not open to counseling at that point. And you know, the stereotype is that it's always the man who's not interested in counseling. But actually, recently that has really changed. And now, surprisingly, most breakups and divorces are initiated by women rather than men. And men are quite open to counseling. So what I would suggest is that you start counseling for yourself, and you can actually use some strategies or take charge of your relationship, which might help, inshallah.
Sure. Okay, here's a message for you, Sister Marzia. It says, good show, Marzia is brilliant. I say parents must let kids know that mum and dad love each other and sometimes argue only to let out anger. Nothing to worry about. Children will understand.
Okay, so thank you for that. Yes, I think often, you know, it's a very common misconception that children should never see parents argue. And again, I tend to think of it a little bit differently, in the sense that it is, you know, if you want a child to develop healthy relationships in life, it's actually unrealistic to portray that you never ever argue about something. The idea is that if your children see you disagree, what is helpful for them is to see you disagree in a respectful manner, to be flexible, to compromise, to still have affection for each other even when you are disagreeing, and then to see you make up. So what children learn from this kind of a relationship is that, yes, it is normal to have conflict in a marital relationship, and it doesn't need to tear you apart. Conflict can actually be healthy. It can make you open to different points of view. It can help you grow as a person, and it can teach you to compromise and to see another person's point of view.
Sure. Do you think this is a common mistake, if I can use that, parents or couples make, that they argue with each other in front of their children, and more so, they might also physically abuse each other in front of their children? Does this have an impact on the children themselves when they grow older?
It is actually devastating for children to see their couples their parents to be violent to each other. In fact, you know, domestic violence is such a damaging thing for children that, as social workers, it used to be the traditional wisdom that if children haven't directly witnessed it, they are not damaged. But what research now shows, that if children are living in the same home where there is disrespectful behavior, or where there is verbal abuse or physical violence, they are actually impacted it as if they were experiencing it themselves. That's how damaging it is. Wow. Even if they're in the same home. And as social workers, we actually have to report those situations to Child Protection Services if we know that there is a child under the age of 16 who's living in the home and there is violence going on. And of course, the reason for that is, again, the research is so clear that it is extremely damaging for children, for their own psychology, for the way they are going to make relationships, what they are, you know, children who experience violence in the home, whether not directly but through their parents, are much more likely, research shows, to have violence in their own relationships.
And what about their personal development with other people? Let's say in school, at workplaces as well. Is that does the violence at home have an impact on their social life as well? It
has an impact on all aspects of their life, because it actually changes the way their brain develops. That's how serious it is. So when a child is, and this would be classified as a trauma, when a child experiences trauma growing up, it actually changes the way it interrupts the normal development of the brain, and it has very lasting impacts on them.
Sure. Okay. Another one that's come through via the text number is the cost of therapy.
Oh, I think it really depends on which therapist you go to.
Again, you did different therapists have different price list, or
generally, therapy is not. I mean, if you look at it, it's. I mean, I don't know about England, but in Canada, it can range anywhere from $70 to $200 an hour. You know, that's very common, and but it's much cheaper than divorce.
Oh, absolutely, especially living in the West. Okay, let me see if we have any more questions to read out. Generally, the overall consensus from our viewers is that the show is going very well. So again, lots of shout outs to Sister Marzia. So we are grateful to have you on Ahlulbayt TV. Let's talk about the issue of culture. I know we were discussing this before the program, that different cultures and parents living in different societies or different countries might have a different approach to parenting. So let's say a parent in East Africa. Again, I'm not trying to generalize this, but just thinking of it outside the box, that. Or stereotype the whole question here, but parents living in East Africa would generally have a different way to parent their child to parents living in the UK. So whereas if a child commits a mistake in Africa, the parent might be, might use the ruler or a stick to discipline the child. In the UK, they might use detention, go to your room, no TV, no cartoons for a week. Is there a right way approach to parenting?
There is definitely, I don't like to say right or wrong, but there's definitely an effective way to parent.
Okay.
And, if we break up parenting styles into authoritarian, which means that you use harsh discipline methods, that's on one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum is what is called permissive parenting, which means it's laissez-faire parenting. In other words, the children rules the house, the child rules the house, the parents accommodate every need of the child, they don't set too many limits. And what research shows is that both these extremes are extremely unhealthy for children. Children do best in an environment where parents are in charge, that they set the rules, they make, they have a great relationship with the child, and yet they are willing to set limits. And that is what is called authoritative parenting. And what research shows is that that's actually the healthiest model for parenting. And that, in fact, is the Islamic model for parenting. So Islam encourages us to have to be respectful towards the child, to listen to the child, to show affection to the child, and yet to set limits and to teach and train the child.
Do you suggest parents who are, let's say, in either of the extreme, if they want to now adopt the middle ground, how do they suddenly change their style? I mean, in a very efficient and a very swift manner. It's
what you do on a daily basis. So again, a style is not static. So in certain ways, in some ways I could be very lenient, and in other ways I could be very authoritarian. But once I recognize that what's healthiest for my child is to actually, let me give you an example that might help. Authoritative parenting or parenting with love and discipline means that you actually have the great relationship. So you take time to explain the rules to the child and why those rules are there. And then what I used to find really helpful as a parent, when we used to have family meetings, for example, so we would discuss an issue we were having. So, for example, if one member of the family was late, and then we would discuss as a family, how this is impacting the other members of the family and what we can do. We would brainstorm, what is a good way to handle that. So once we come up with certain ways of what the consequences would be for that behavior, then all of us are subject to the same thing. And that I really find is the Islamic way. So for example, if you're teaching a child not to swear is not Islamic, whether it's an adult or a child.
Sure.
So once you discuss as a family that we are all under the rule of God, in that sense, and what is a healthy thing for all of us is to manage our language, and how can we support each other to do that.
Right.
So that's a very different way from parenting than saying, I'm in control over you and you are the child, so you obey me. The idea is that we all obey God, you know, at the end of the day.
And in making that transition, again, do you think that this will have an impact on the way the child therefore sees the parent? That one day he's treating me, or one day he behaves like this towards me, or he punishes me, or he disciplines me in this manner, and then suddenly it's another approach. Does that have an impact on the child?
So again, you know, going back to the way I would do it, when I would learn differently, for example, you know, when my children were young is when I started reading everything that I could on parenting and started educating myself. I would actually share with my children that, you know, this is what I learned and I'm going to try it because I want to do this right. And
so you can disclose your secrets to your children.
Yeah, in fact, you know, when I used to go away for a weekend, the children always knew that when I came back, there would be new strategies used on them. So it turned out okay, alhamdulillah.
Sure. Right. There's two more to ask, but I will just ask one more. This is from Sister Batul via the text number. Thank you very much indeed, Ahlulbayt TV, for your show. Sister Marzia, you are a great guest. Definitely have you on Ahlulbayt TV again. My question to you is, what are the benefits of being friends with your child? So again, we've asked this already before, but just for her sake.
So again, the idea is that at the end of the day, most parents want the best for their children. And what they want is that the child should be a moral child, that they should follow their values. And the best way to do that is just two ways. First is to model your values, and the second is to develop your relationship. Once you develop your relationship, when the children grow up, that's actually your only leverage with that child, is that they don't want to disappoint you because they look up to you and they respect you.
Sure. Sister Marzia, thank you very much for being with us on Ahlulbayt TV. Wish you a pleasant stay in London.
Thank you so much.
And we look forward to having you on Ahlulbayt TV again the next time around when you're back in the UK. Thanks to all those watching at home. Just a final tweet from one of our viewers again, who says, when I heard Sister Marzia, I messaged so many young mothers to watch the program. Definitely worthwhile. So thank you very much for your tweet. So again, lots of messages coming your way. Thank you for watching. We hope you've enjoyed the program. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Have a very good evening.